What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic channel, talking college football DFS, week 4, Friday slate. 3 games last night, 3 games tonight, and I'm here to break it down for you guys. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. And if you've never heard of Prize Picks, they are daily prop-based contests. No sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You just make lineups of player props. You can make lineups up to 5 players where you can 10x your entry fee. And you can do this across sports, college football mixed with NFL, MLB, whatever it is you are an expert in, you can cross those sports. And if you click the link in the video description below, you're going to get a first match deposit bonus up to $100. So make sure to check out Prize Picks. All right, so we'll bring you behind the scenes, show you our data usage, and talk about these 3 games for DFS. Okay, getting started. Virginia takes on Syracuse. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this layout by now, but at the top, just for those of you that may be new, plays per game is just a way to measure pace. So 76 plays per game for Virginia. They're passing the ball 52.6% of the time. OLD line, that's just sacks allowed versus sacks generated. There's your Vegas statistics, and then your defensive stats allowed. So passing yards per game, passing yards per attempt. Virginia is allowing 215.5 per game, 7 per attempt. And then on the ground, Virginia is allowing 145 yards per game, 3.9 yards per attempt. Getting into this, Virginia takes on Syracuse. Syracuse is a 9-point favorite. Very lucky to scoot by Purdue last week. But the total in this game is 54 points. It is the most attractive game we have on this 3-game slate. Very low-scoring environment. So immediately, Brennan Armstrong does stand out as somebody we should be taking a look at. We know what he did last year, elite receiver play, but Brennan Armstrong is kind of suffering through a makeshift offensive line. They replaced 4 starters this offseason, and the going has been tough for him. He's not had a lot of time to throw to his receivers, and we've seen this hinder Virginia at times. Now, he's very mobile, 150 yards on the ground this year, averages 50 per game. He's shown upside to rush for even 100 at times. So Armstrong is still a very solid play, and volume's not an issue. Nearly 34 pass attempts per game, 236 yards. I'm expecting some positive regression for Armstrong. He doesn't have the same OC as last year, so maybe the efficiency is not going to be quite the same. That OC actually now is the OC of Syracuse. We'll talk about him in a second. But all this to say, Armstrong is still probably a top 2 quarterback on this slate just due to lack of alternatives really in the other games. The backfield's a complete committee. Parrish Jones, he's splitting with Mike Collins, Xavier Brown. There's not a ton to see here outside of GPPs, or maybe you could look to like a contrarian Mike Collins or something, but this isn't the best situation here to target. The receivers are players I want to get to. Billy Kemp is out of this game. That sort of narrows snaps to Dontavian Wicks, Keaton Thompson, and Lavelle Davis. Dontavian Wicks was their number 1 receiver last year. He still is out-targeted Keaton Thompson, 36-24, but Thompson's been way more efficient. He's outgained Wicks 235 to 155. I would expect this to normalize at some point this year. I think Thompson comes in more owned today just because of the past performances, but ultimately these guys are very close. I think you could play Wicks as a leverage play off Thompson, but expect both of them to be heavily owned. And then I would also expect a lot of ownership on Lavelle Davis at 4,600. He's the cheapest of this bunch, and he's, in my opinion, the best value play we have potentially on this slate, depending on where you want to define value. But 4,600, he's a solid play there. Going to Syracuse, this is definitely a team we want to target with the 31.5 team total on this game environment. In this game environment, it's one of the better spots on the slate. Virginia. So their OC moved over to Syracuse this offseason. He was known for pass heaviness, up-tempo schemes. Now with Syracuse and Garrett Shrader, they're not going to pass quite as much as Virginia, but they have played fast, and that has helped Shrader. He's very involved in the run game, 201 yards this year. And then in the pass game, he's shown a ceiling we've never really seen with Shrader before. 236 yards per game on just 26 attempts. You can tell this is very efficient, but no, it's not the most voluminous role. Either way, with his team total in this game environment, Shrader is still probably the QB1 on the slate. Sean Tucker, coming off a bad game, his yardage average has now fallen below 100. I would expect that to normalize as well. He has one of the best roles in college football, and they nearly lost that game without using him. He still leads the team in targets. He's second on the team in receiving yards. So even when they're down in games, his role is fantastic. Yes, he's expensive, but he's probably a guy we should prioritize even with the expensive salary on a short slate like this. They only used LaQuint Allen as a change of pace. In the receiving room, we have some injuries. Isaiah Jones got hurt. Trebor Pena is out. That will condense routes a little bit here. Oronde Gadsden is the guy I really want to touch on here. He's second in targets, just barely behind Sean Tucker, but he leads the team in receiving yards. He's coming off an 8-target performance, went over 100 yards receiving. His routes have now crested 90%, I think partially due to good performance, partially because Syracuse is battling some injuries in the receiver core, but he is still fairly affordable in the context of this slate compared to the role he's playing. So I think Gadsden is a pretty solid play. And then from there, I just want to talk to you about some route rates. Damian Alford was at 61% last week. Courtney Jackson was at 56, and Devon Cooper was at 59. So you can tell it's a bit of a rotation behind Gadsden, who was at 90%. How do we break this down? Cooper is second on the team in targets among receivers. He's second on the team in receiving yards among receivers, and he's 3K flat. So yes, his role is not drastically different than Devon Cooper. He's actually running less routes than Damian Alford, but when you adjust this opportunity for price, Devon Cooper at the Stone Min, I think, makes the most sense. Courtney Jackson and Damian Alford would be your players you pivot to in GPPs. Nevada taking on Air Force. 24-point spread in favor of Air Force. 46 total, so very slow game, but Air Force still does have a solid implied team total because of the massive difference in spread. Nevada's completely rebuilding, and they've been a disaster this year. Nate Cox is returning from injury. He started previously. Shane Illingworth has started in his place. I don't think there's a clear starter, and I also don't think there's a lot of room for error for whoever starts. There's a decent chance both these guys play regardless. Illingworth isn't mobile. The offense is now really slow and run heavy. It's the exact opposite of what we saw from Nevada last year. Much of their coaching staff left, and now they've completely transitioned. Tough to play any of these guys. But if you're looking for just some cheap PPR volume, they have fairly cheap receivers. They're going to be using Jamal Bell, BJ Castile, and Devellon Campbell as their top 3 receivers. Tyrese Mack got injured already this year, so you won't see him. These guys are somewhat affordable, but, all of them being more expensive than Lavelle Davis doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think you can play like a Jamal Bell or a BJ Castile as one-offs in your lineups, even Campbell, but I don't think any of these guys are useful outside of tournaments. Nobody's averaging more than 30.5 receiving yards per game, so it's really inefficient target volume. The run game is somewhat interesting. Toa Tau has a lot of volume. He's averaging 22.8 attempts per game. I guess I should say opportunities. That's carries combined with targets, not just raw attempts. Also inefficient here, 69.5 rushing yards per game. But what we can say about Tau is he has an excellent receiving role. 14 targets this year. That's 3.5 per game, 22 yards per game through the air. So yes, he's probably going to be slamming into the back of his O-line a lot. And then on 3rd and long, he at least gets some check down. So he brings that PPR floor with you that a lot of other running backs don't bring. Devontae Lee is a change of pace. He averages 11.8 touches per game. I think you can use him in tournaments as well as a average price adjusted play. Want to be careful with how much I hype up these Nevada backs because I think the ceiling is tapped, but the floor is pretty good. Air Force. Hazik Daniels is always a tough evaluation. 142 rushing yards this year. That's just shy of 50 per game. And then as a passer, he's averaging 72 yards per game. So he needs to be treated like a glorified running back. At his price tag, he's a guy that generally gets left out of my lineups unless it's showdown or a 2-game slate, 3-game slate. Here, we're kind of on the borderline where do you really want to use Hazik Daniels and not use Bernard Armstrong or Garrett Schrader? I think that's a legit question. So he's just barely on the outside looking in, but for tournaments, the upside's still there. He could be the one that scores 3 touchdowns and get you to a GPP winning score. I think you bring him into your player pool, but for cash and stuff, you still prefer the QBs in the first game. In the running game, Brad Roberts has about as secure of a workload as you can get. He's still averaging over 100 yards this year on the ground, coming off a bad game against Wyoming, but averaged over 100 yards on the ground last year. He's a guy that also averages 23 attempts per game. He hasn't seen a target since, I don't even know if he's ever seen a target. He hasn't seen one in the last 2 years, I can tell you that. But The ground volume is very good for Roberts. I think he's just a bit expensive. Probably still worth playing, though, because the volume's awesome. A couple guys missed Air Force's last game. Dane Kinnaman and DeAndre Hughes. These are like slot back receiver types. DraftKings has some trouble labeling these guys in terms of position, but they get carries and they see targets. That opened the door for John Lee Eldridge to play more, and he saw 13 carries. He's easily been the most efficient back on a per carry basis, and I think he might have carved out a larger role. He was involved even prior to their absences. Now, neither of them have been updated. DraftKings has them listed out. That has not been updated since last week. You'll have to watch pregame to see if Kinnaman and DeAndre Hughes are playing. They're only GPP options if they do play, because most of what they do comes as receivers, only a little bit of carries per game. Like Hughes was averaging 4.5 carries per game. 4.5 carries per game. And Kinnaman, he was averaging 2.5. But what it really did was just open the door for extra John Lee Eldridge work. So that's what I'm looking for. I'd be more interested in playing Eldridge if Kinnaman and Hughes are absent. In the receiving game, this also kind of consolidated opportunities for David Cormier, who has really good routes all year. So don't look at the 4 targets and assume he was only playing because those guys were out. He's actually played a lot prior to that. But tight end Kyle Patterson played a little more. Cade Harris played a little more. If we get Hughes and Kinnaman back, I probably am not looking at any of them, just because Kinnaman and Hughes give you a floor in the run game. These other players do not. All right. Last game. Boise, UTEP, another banger. 45.5 total. Boise is a 16-point favorite. So they're another team we should target. But Boise's really struggled through the air this year. Hank Bachmeier, it's not been pretty. We'll just say that. He got benched in week 1. They went right back to him. He's averaging 134 yards per game. He's not mobile. Yes, in tournaments, you can play Bachmeier because Boise does have a really good team total. He's been productive at times, but I don't love playing him. Boise's now, down a couple of players in the pass game as well. Austin Bolt's been gone, but they lost tight end Riley Smith. He was actually pretty involved in terms of targets for them. So I think the receiving core is still the same. It's Stephen Cobbs, Latrell Caples as the top 2. Billy Bowens kind of saw his route rate cut. He's not a guy I'm hyper interested in at this point. I think for tournaments, you could look to Bowens, but if I'm just looking at the routes and telling you guys what happened last week, Billy Bowens, 45%. And then we actually saw Davis Cutter, 60%. Cutter's a guy that started previously for this team. This is something I'd be watching. Maybe you could play Cutter and get some leverage. He has not been targeted much, but again, he's now, at least in a 1-week sample, running more routes than Billy Bowens. At tight end, again, Riley Smith gone. Tyneil Hopper was the guy that played most of the snaps and routes. Kurt Rafdal did form they weren't on the field the whole time. It was like 51% of routes, 52% for Tyneil Hopper, 30% for Rafdal. So for those of you playing Showdown or just firing darts at the Boise pass game, I would prefer Hopper over Rafdal. The backfield, similar situation to the QB room. George Halani has been horrific this year in terms of efficiency. His actual counting numbers look okay, but man, he's just slamming into the back of his offensive line repeatedly. And then the actual explosive playmaker, Ashton Genty, has just been used as a change of pace. Right now, Halani's averaging 23 touches per game. Genty's at 11, and Genty's more efficient than Halani. This is a matchup that does benefit these guys. So playing UTEP with even inefficient play, Halani should be able to scrap together a productive game based on his volume. Again, 23 touches per game. Even if you're just slamming into the back of your offensive line for 3 yards per carry, 23 attempts is going to be very beneficial. And both these guys actually are good pass catchers. Halani, I think, is overachieved with 32 yards per game. Same with Genty at 26, like the under on some of their props in the pass game, especially as 16-point favorites over UTEP with no desire for them to run. But Halani's a good play on the slate. Genty is a decent GPP pivot. UTEP, they've been down a lot in games, and they're just throwing the ball incessantly. Now, I'm a little worried about Gavin Hardison's leash at this point. He's not mobile whatsoever. He is averaging 241.5 passing yards per game on 40.5 attempts, but tons of mistakes. They don't really have much behind him. Calvin Brownholtz has been there, and he routinely gets beat out by Hardison. But, man, at some point, they're probably going to consider making a change. They haven't been able to win games with him. But because they are throwing so much and they're so pass-heavy, we have some really good PPR volume in the pass game. Tyron Smith is averaging 14.3 targets per game. I think you just played Tyron Smith. Even with the bad offense, he's still averaging over 100 yards. Ronaldo Flores, frustratingly, is still a running back. He's averaging 9.3 targets per game and 68 yards. I wish he was just a receiver, but you have to play him in the flex, I guess. Not like have to, as you should, but if you're going to play him, it has to be in the flex. I think he's actually okay there because of the running back situation on this slate. There's really only 3 guys I like on this slate at running back, in Holani, Brad Roberts, and Tucker. And I'm not even sold on locking in Roberts. So maybe you could play some Flores in the flex. And then the last receiving position has kind of been changing. It was Kelly Akari to start the year, but he's not played very well. And they've dabbled with getting some other receivers involved. So I think he is a bit risky. Kelly Akari, 47% of the routes last week. Jeremiah Ballard, 35%. Walter Dawn, 31%. They rotated this wide receiver three ways, basically, which makes them very hard to target. I'm trying to get to Flores and Tyron Smith if I'm targeting this pass game. In the backfield, it's basically 50-50 committee at this point. Ronald A. Watt, Deion Hankins. On the year, it looks significantly balanced in favor of A. Watt, but that's something that they've kind of transitioned away from recently. Just 8 carries for A. Watt last week. Hankins had 7. I'm worried about this being a timeshare throughout the rest of the year. Neither of them has been efficient. So I'm not sure you want to target these guys much to begin with. And neither's particularly involved in the pass game. A-Watt has just 4 targets. That's 1 target per game. Like, I would rather take a shot on one of the Boise backs who's better target volume, or just like a Flores or something in my flex spot, instead of going to like an A-Watt or a Hankins. But they are very cheap. I think we can say that. They're very, very cheap. So I could see playing a little bit of them. But that'll do it for us today. Let me know in the comment section what you think of these plays, who you're eyeing for this 3-game slate. And if I missed anything, I will make sure to get back to you in the comments. And if you'd like to reach out on Twitter, you can find me at Matt_Gajewski. Otherwise, hit the thumbs up button on the way out. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you again next time.